president's speech. Rufai, 4 days later, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has given a speech. Was that a speech that was worth the wait, or did you expect something more?
In the end, I wish he didn't even speak. Because if he didn't speak, it would have been way better than what he had said yesterday. And I think with due respect, it's obvious now this speeches thing do not work. The president, we need a real interview. I don't know if he's done any, you can tell me, you watching. But I think we need real interview where we can really discuss policies and discuss outcomes. Because it was just a speech with a lot of rhetoric, no outcomes. And a lot of things that you can easily fact check. Take, for instance, he talked about, they made revenue of about 9.1 trillion, better than 2023. But also there's a story making the round that our revenue targets from January to March, we missed our revenue targets. We are constantly reaching revenue target. That's why the budget deficit keeps increasing. So when you're celebrating that you made 9.1 trillion and you're missing revenue targets and your deficit keeps increasing and you're showing up with a lot of borrowing. He talked about CNG. Where's the CNG buses? What has he done? 2022, Timi Preyesiva was talking about 5 million target CNG conversion kits. He's talking about 1 million now. We've not even talked about the sustainability of how to get the CNG stations. Also, he talked about 70,000 minimum wage, which we all now see that is the lowest in our history. 40 years ago, the minimum wage was well over $215, like we calculated the other day, Dr. Abati. 40 years ago, 125 naira, $215. Today, minimum wage is $47. What did he say he did again? He said agricultural cultivation. He wants to do 10 million hectares. The 500,000 hectares he promised last year, where's the result? If he promised 500,000 hectares, why do we have over 40% food inflation? Do you know what the food inflation is in Kenya that is causing all the riots? It's 7%. Nigeria is over 40%. He couldn't deliver on 500,000 hectares. We have not seen all the food he says he cultivated. Now he's talking 10 million hectares. Have we fixed the security on the land? So there are many things that's why we want to interact with him so we can know his policy positions. It's not written speeches, it's what he wants to say. Let's even see how he understands the policies. It's not too much to ask for from a president.
Okay. We discussed this same subject exhaustively, I think, yesterday on This Day Live, the Sunday talk show, the other program, that I appear in. And some of the things that we said was that, there are key takeaways in this speech. Number one, the president tried to show empathy, commiserate with people, say they should, call off the strike. Number two, he warned protesters to eschew ethnic bigotry that we have seen at Lagospedia, here in Lagos, where they are saying Igbos should leave Lagos. The president also said those who have been using this for opportunism to heat up the polity will be punished. The law will catch up with them. He outlined various programs that he has done for the youth in the last 1 year. But beyond that, he talked about economic reforms and the gains of his economic reforms, debt service reduction, CNG initiative, opportunities for the manufacturing sector, and all of that. People can argue with that and say, they don't believe what he's saying. And then, of course, he asked people to suspend the protests. And he called for dialogue with the youths, that the government is prepared to dialogue with the people. I think at paragraph 31, he said, I have heard you loud and clear. And this is a listening government. We're prepared to listen. Now, in the course of our discussions yesterday, Professor Kila, Anthony Kila, I think tried to explain what a presidential speech should be about and his own assessment. He talked about delivery. He said, with regard to delivery, he didn't think anybody expects that Tinubu is an orator. In terms of, content, he thinks that the speech was well written, okay? In terms of context, he thought, in fact, what the president did not say is probably more important than what he said. And then, of course, impact. He said in terms of impact, That's for people to determine. And it is in terms of impact that Nigerians have been divided. Some have praised the president, like Festus Keyamo, who says it was a balanced presentation. Well, what do you expect Festus Keyamo to say? But there are people who have also criticized the speech. Omoyele Sowore says it is beautiful nonsense. Professor Wole Soyinka, Nobel laureate, says that speech should have addressed how Nigerian policemen turned violence into an instrument for state negotiation. And there are many people who hold that view. And he thinks that the president should have condemned the police. And then you have people, other people who say, well, this is beautiful nonsense. I think that's Omoyele Sowore. But on the whole, I think that the biggest concern of Nigerians is that in the whole of that speech, President Tinubu did not respond directly to the demands of the protesters. The protesters had specific demands. Instead, he was listing his achievements and making promises. If I had taken a look at that speech, I did that, approving signing off on presidential speeches for 4 years. I would have constructed it differently. There would have been another day to talk about achievements. He could have appealed to Nigerians. He could even have set up a committee to say we are addressing this demand, that demand. But in any case, the people in Ojota, they called off their strike, and they say that there will be no more protests. Maybe in that regard, there was some impact at Ojota, Lagos.
Maybe it was just because they felt like this isn't even working. The idea of protest, as Malala Yousafzai put it, is that it's the voice of the voiceless. When people, especially citizens, feel like they're not being heard, then they then take the route of protest. As we've often said, not many people would want to take the route of protest, but when people are pushed to the wall and feel like that's the only option left, then they protest. So it then brings a question as to why then was there a massive call for a speech, an address by the president? It wasn't just because we wanted to hear his voice or see his face or check how he's doing. There were reasons for that, because we were like, oh, why should he speak? What is the point of doing that? The idea is that when people come out to protest because they feel that their voices are not being heard, and to get a response from their leader, then it is important that the main thrust of that speech should be to address why he came. So if you're looking at the purpose of a thing, then unfortunately, you would then be able to deem that speech as a fail. Unfortunately, in terms of F9, by the way, I hear that there's still protests in Ojota, so they haven't completely called off the protest. They had said 10 days, and so this is just day 5, and we'll see just how deep the impact was. Now, going back to my thoughts, in terms of the fact that if the purpose of the speech was to address the concerns of the people who felt that their voices were not heard, in fact, it almost seems as if their voices were non-existent. If you look at the detail of the speech. Let me say, in terms of how he started very strong, but unfortunately, as he proceeded, it kept falling and falling and falling until the numbers went flat in terms of the grade for that speech. He could have done a lot better. This was the moment to redeem, even though he had missed the chance when he ought to have come out to speak before the protest started. No president wants any life of his citizens lost. Not one. Every single Nigerian life matters. So if a leader can prevent a life from being lost, one life, then he would take all the options available to him. Part of that option was perhaps to come to the people to speak and then open up the channels for dialogue and set timelines and actual milestones as to what, he hopes to do in the next few weeks, next few months, to at least even assuage the agitations of the people. I don't think that was clear cut out in that speech, and that's quite unfortunate. I'll take my last point here. We can take a leaf from both Kenya and what's happening in the UK, and I say this with regards to ethnic baiting and bigotry. I thought you could have come out with a harder stance on that. If you listen to the Home Secretary of the United Kingdom, Eva Cooper, she mentioned so many times, we will not take this. We will not protect our people, and there's no room for that. But, there's no time to go, and I wanted to speak a bit more in terms of just breaking it down. The youths want their president to listen to them, not just to speak. And I hope the president will demonstrate that he is a listening president, not just for the optics.